What's up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the shop. It's a beautiful March day. Hopefully it is nice where you're at. I see weather moving across the country. As I've gotten older, I've turned into an old farmer and for some reason pay a lot of attention to the weather. I don't know why. It is like, there's that meme about you reach a certain age, you either become really into, craft beer or World War II documentaries. Well, somehow I've reached the age where the weather is front and center of my mind. I don't know why. But anyway, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it. You guys are great. I know some people are listening because I'm getting feedback, and I do appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for feeding back. Still no paying sponsors other than my wonderful customers and you guys that subscribe. If you'd like to support the podcast, if you think this is educational and entertaining, you can either subscribe on Instagram. If you head to Binder Boneyard on Instagram, you can become a subscriber. It's like $1.99 a month. I know $2 a month for some people is tight when you're counting your pennies, but I know some other people don't even miss the $1.99 and change that's in their couch cushions. So, if you want to support, that's great. The other place to support is Patreon. If you are into that, you can head over to Patreon and search for the Binder Boneyard Podcast, and you can be a supporter there. It's also nominal. I don't even know what it is over there, but I know it's pretty low. But the other thing too is that on Patreon you can donate whatever you want. So if you feel like you're getting $5 a month worth of value out of this, you can donate $5 or whatever. And there's some people over there that've dropped off over the years, and then new ones have joined in. But there were some pretty substantial donators for a while, and I appreciate that because, like I said, or if you're new here, I pay for this stuff out of pocket. Like Brad, my producer, who does all the editing and whatnot, he creates the intro. He created the intro song and things like that. I have to pay him. Like, that's not free. So, doing these podcasts was, first and foremost to get the information out to the world, because there's a lot of bad info and a lot of info isn't out there. A lot of the guys that taught me this stuff are dead. And so, I feel like a personal responsibility to make sure this gets out so that it's not gone forever. And I know other people know this stuff too, but they're not doing podcasts. They're not making YouTube videos. They are also taking it to their grave. So, I feel like I'm doing a little bit of a service just getting it out into the world. But I'm paying for this out of pocket. So any support, donations, whatever, it all helps. And Brad had a baby not that long ago. His wife had a baby, I should say. So I know he appreciates getting paid as well. And that's partially why I've ramped these things back up, because I know I'm paying him to help feed his family and things like that. So it's a big cycle and a circle of life. And so anyway, I appreciate everybody. Again, thank you for all of that. And one thing that I've noticed after doing this for, like 7 years now, there's reoccurring themes that I just, I touch on, and they get a lot of interest. And then, after a few months, it's like I start getting the same questions again, or, it's just a new group of people or whatever. And so One of the popular topics or things that gets a lot of interest is the DIY stuff. Like, I get a ton of questions from guys that are like, hey, I just got this international pickup. I don't know anything about internationals. I pulled it out of a field, and I want to restore it top to bottom, front to back. I want to make it like a brand new truck. Oh, by the way, I'm 19 and I have a minimum wage job. And so, I don't have kids myself. I'm not the world's greatest mentor. So when I get these calls or these messages from guys, it's almost like I've become some sort of teacher or mentor, because I'm like, listen, you got to get realistic. Like, you're making $1,800 a month, maybe. Your expenses are $1,750 a month. You're not restoring a pickup on $50 a month of wiggle room. You might be able to fix it, but restoration, a nice restoration on a truck, it costs a lot of money. So, I get down to the basics, like make it run, make it stop, make it steer, then put tires on it, then work on suspension. Then, there's a checklist that you need to go down to keep from spending a bunch of money that you don't need to spend, or saving yourself some heartache before it's too long. Like, I mean, I've got story after story of guys where first thing they do, and I call it the high school kid phenomenon, where the first thing they do is they spend all of their money on wheels and tires. And I'm raising my hand right now because I am guilty of that. Also, when I was young, you want to look cool or whatever, and the thing runs like crap, but you got $2,000 worth of wheels and tires, which are also the first thing that gets sold when you decide to part the truck out. So no, the first thing you really should do if you're starting out, the very first thing is hopefully you have some tools. Crescent wrench and vice grips are not considered essential tools. You really need a legit box end wrench set from 1/4 to 7/8, and you need a socket set in the same dimension from 1/4 to 7/8. And then after 7/8, there's some specialty sockets, 1.125", and I think there's one other one, or maybe 15/16, that you'll need for some other tasks. But and then in your sockets, you want a shallow and a deep. You also need some Phillips screwdrivers in various sizes, number 2s, number 3s, number 4s. You can't buy a number 4. Well, I take it back. You can buy number 4 bits, and I think like the tool trucks or maybe the specialty places online, you can get number 4 Phillips screwdrivers, but they're hard to find. You go to any of the hardware stores or anything like that, you are not going to find a number 4 screwdriver. You might find a driver bit for an impact setup, which is fine too if you are fortunate enough to have some Milwaukee or DeWalt impact tools, electric impacts. But no, with a good set of a few 3 or 4 flat screwdrivers in various sizes, a couple of the Phillips 2, 3, 4 sizes, then some chisels and some punches. Try not to cheap out on them, because cheap chisels almost do more harm than good. But you want some chisels and some punches, because You don't want to use your fancy screwdrivers as chisels and punches. As tempting as it is, and as often as it happens, and I do it all the time, I have a drawer of junk screwdrivers that have been used as punches and chisels and pry bars because they are junk. I got them at swap meets and they're beat up or whatever. And so those are kind of the sacrificial ones. But when you're doing actual punching or chiseling or things, you really need the right ones. So really, for 95% of what you're doing, that's it for hard tools. You should probably have a test light for doing electrical testing. But yeah, you can get a lot done with just that basic set of tools that I mentioned. Go to Harbor Freight, get some icons, or even go to Lowe's, get the Craftsman. They're not the cheapest. They're not the most expensive, but that middle of the road brand, because believe it or not, the icons at Harbor Freight have come up to middle of the road. The old days when I was starting out and it was all the Pittsburgh garbage where the ratchets had like 18 teeth in them and 4 of them were broken already. They've come a long ways. I personally don't have any of that stuff here. I'm all old school Craftsman or Snap-on or whatever was in my grandpa's toolbox. But I just know from my experience out in the world that the newer icon stuff is pretty decent. But no. And then once you have your tool set and you kind of know what's up, then you start in on this project. Does it run? If not, make it run. Figure out, if the motor's not stuck, if it turns over with the key, then, now it's time for carburation and spark. Carburetor rebuild kits, $20, $30, $40, depending on your carb. Or as much as I hate to say it, I'm not a big fan of supporting the foreign markets, but you can buy, if you have a single barrel, like if you have an early Scout with a 152 or 196, it's got a 1-barrel Holley, Amazon, you can get a 1-barrel carb on Amazon for like $90. It takes a little fiddling, but you can make that work. They're selling knockoff Motorcraft 2 barrels on Amazon for like $70, which, if you had a 304 or 345, you could scab that on there and make it run. But anyway, so, fuel system, make the thing run first. Because if the motor's bad, that pretty much shoots your whole project in the foot right there. Then you decide to go which direction to go. If it's super rusty and it needs a bunch of other work, doing a motor swap or repower probably isn't the smartest use of your budget. You probably should unload that truck, either part it out and try to make some money on it, or you just turn it over, sell it, get rid of it, and start over. If you've got a truck, like what happens here quite a bit is they'll be pretty decent body wise, but the obsolete brake parts, they just ran them until the shoes wore through the drums, or the motor locked up from sitting, and so it needs a whole new motor, but the body's good. So we'll do a motor swap and get it back on the road. People ask us to part out good trucks all the time, and I'm like, no. I mean, if it's got solid rockers and cab corners and the cowl's good, or mildly rusty, no, I'm not cutting this thing up for you. Like, we only tear down bad trucks here. So anyway, so you have to be realistic like that. And I know some of you guys are in places where internationals are pretty rare, so you have to weigh that too. Like, what are the odds of finding another one? Or what are the odds of finding a replacement motor? Because if you got a bad 304, there are tons of used takeouts on Marketplace and whatnot. I've seen Even in the Midwest, Kentucky, Tennessee, whatever. I see guys running 304s for, $250 to $500, which puts you money ahead when you're trying to do this thing. But, be realistic too. Like, if you don't have any mechanical abilities, you don't have a garage, you don't have an engine hoist or tractor or something like that where you can do the motor swap in the first place, again, be realistic. Like, if you can't, if it's one thing where it's in the driveway of your mom's duplex and you can, do tinkering and brakes and things like that, fine. But if you're if you got to do a motor swap that requires cherry pickers and a bunch of space and, it's going to look like hell and everybody's going to be pissed at you, then, maybe that's not the truck for you, or you need to figure out some other place to keep it while you're doing that work. Especially young guys. I mean, I lived in an apartment. So when I graduated high school, I moved out, 2 days after graduation, and I moved into an apartment in town and, realized really quickly that, town is not conducive to getting anything done. I wasn't a mechanic. I didn't have any internationals then. I had a 68 F100 Ford pickup, and I didn't need to work on it. The thing ran fine, stopped, drove. It was reliable, always ran. So I never had to work on it. Well, then one time the brakes went out. The master cylinder went bad and the pedal just whiffed to the floor. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have hardly any tools, whatever. It had to go to the shop down the road and they replaced it. But that's when it dawned on me real quick that I can't do anything at where I lived. So shortly after that, I did get my first Scout and had to keep it out of my dad's, which was also a pain in the butt because I had to drive out there to work on it and whatever. Long story. But I'm just saying, like, be thoughtful in your process before you just start assuming you're going to be able to rebuild a transmission in the yard of your townhouse. But like I said, be realistic. Think about it through. Like, don't get attached to these projects. If it was a family heirloom, your grandpa gave it to you or something like that, I understand. But if this is just something you pulled out of a field or you got for $300 or, because it was cheap and nobody wanted it, be realistic. Nobody wanted it for a reason. And now you have it and understand why nobody wanted it. So, cut bait, move on to something that is a little easier to deal with or less problematic. And it will save you a ton of heartache in the end. I do end up with a lot of trucks here that were somebody's project and they were in over their head or life happened and they couldn't take it with them and whatever, and they end up here. So, don't be afraid to get out of a project that's going to be too much for your situation at the time. Especially when you're young, you got time. I know tomorrow's never promised and all of that inspirational meme stuff, but you're 18, you're 19, you got time. I look back, I'm 46 now, and I look back when I was 20, and I thought that not having my transmission swapped by this certain date was going to ruin my life and be the end of the world. And here I am 26 years later. It didn't ruin my life. So just, it's not the end of the world, but, no, just like I said, find a good truck, start with the motor. If you get the motor running, then you move on to the wheels, make sure it has brakes, make sure it rolls. A lot of people overlook their drive shafts. I've had several instances where guys will get a truck running, do the brakes, do the wheels, get the lights working. They go to drive it, and they're so excited about driving it that they just keep driving it. And after 2 or 3 days, the rear drive shaft goes flying out of it because the U-joints went bad and from sitting for 40 years, and they didn't think about it. Didn't occur to them that the U-joints, the drive shaft, is a wearable item also. And so before you get too excited and, drive it around the block, drive it up the street, but before you put any daily driver miles on it, really, don't forget the U-joints at the bare minimum, or, you need a whole new drive shaft. And that's where when people call here looking for used drive shafts, I know rarely do I sell a used drive shaft because they're always worn out. The slip shafts are all sloppy and wobbly, or the U-joints are bad, or somebody, a U-joint went bad and then it beat the ear of the yoke up and they drove a new cap in and peened it on so it would stay in, stuff like that. So just, if it's in your budget or if you save up a couple of months, have a new drive shaft made. It'll last you another 40 years, and it's something you don't have to worry about. But it's often overlooked. And then, like I say, running first, rolling, brakes second. Obviously make sure the transmission does something. If it's a manual, drain the oil, see if there's any teeth or anything comes out. That's an easy, cheap inspection thing. May need a clutch, but you don't know until it's running. Same with automatic. You don't know an automatic is bad until you try to drive it. If the fluid's up there and you go for a hot lap and you only have first gear, or you don't have first gear and it goes straight to third, or stuff like that, then you've got problems there. But that stuff you can't figure out till it's moving. And still, transmissions are cheaper than new engines or different engines. It seems to me like transmissions are easier to find used as well. I see a lot of automatics and manuals for sale, more so than running motors. So that's something to think about too. That's why I still double down on motor first, then make it roll and stop. Then hopefully your transmission's good. If it is, make sure you do drive shaft, and then electrical. And I say that because electrical will ruin your day faster than anything. Because if you have a fire, that's it. You might be able to put it out. You were smart and had your fire extinguisher with you, but when it melts all the wires behind the dash together, you're done. There's no repairing that. That is a rewire. You have to, I get called all the time from people that just want to buy a dash harness or just want to buy an engine harness. And again, we've sold a few, but I try not to because, there's no guarantees in 60-year-old wiring. And so when you're putting your stuff together, I tell people pull the fuses on some of that stuff just to make sure you have the right fuses in there in the first place. Because it's not uncommon, especially these old farm trucks, to have 22 shells as fuses. The old trick I learned from my dad, where you take the Wrigley's gum wrapper, the silver tinfoil one, and you would wrap it around the blown fuse and then press that in there, and magically it would work, because who knew that they use real aluminum foil in the gum wrappers. But that's what starts fires. If the fuse blew for a reason, sometimes it's a stupid reason, but nonetheless, the fuse is there as a safety. And some of these guys, the thing I've found too is they take weird fuses. They take a 14 amp SFE or 20 amp SFE. And if you don't know what you're looking for in fuses and you just jam a 15 amp in there, well, it's too long. It doesn't fit the holder correctly. and it splays the ears of the fuse holder out, well, then they touch the ears of the fuse holder next to it. So now, instead of having individual 14 amp circuits, you touch all of these fuse holders together, and now you just have a big brick of continuity. And so there's no point in having fuses. You see that happening. So it's important to pull the fuses, make sure you have the right ones in there. And if you have one that's constantly tripping, obviously you have a problem that you need to trace out with your test light and go from there. But yeah, wiring will ruin your day quicker than anything. So make sure that it starts on the key. Make sure that your heater works, your wipers work. Obviously, you have lights and you're legal before you install your new head unit and, pair of 12s under the seat and your 1,000-watt amp. Because you really need lights and turn signals before you need bump and tunes. That was one thing I didn't ever get into when I was younger, was stereo stuff. Finally, now in my black truck, the Eagle truck, I have a couple of subs and things like that, and the truck sounds really nice when you're driving down the road. It's nice to hear the radio. But this is the first truck, and you're gonna laugh, the first truck that I've had with a working radio. I mean, that we did that, about 5 years ago we put that in. So I've been driving old junky trucks since, I was 19. And none of them had a functioning radio. The Ford did. I did, my mom got me a gift certificate to Car Tunes or something for my birthday when I was 19, and I had a stereo installed because I didn't know what I was doing. So had a professional install it, a couple of 5-inch speakers, and that was it. And then after that, every international I had did not have a radio. And then, now we have the invention of Bluetooth and speakers and things like that. So there's no reason to have a radio in there. But for my black truck, it's nice to connect my phone to it and not have to worry about a Bluetooth speaker rolling around or anything like that. But what I'm telling you is, don't spend any money on stereos. Just live with the Bluetooth speaker for a while. That and half the time these trucks are so loud inside you can't hear stereo anyways. Which is why I've got 2 5s, 2 6x9s, and 2 10s under the seat. Single 10-inch sub under the back seat of the black truck. And with all those speakers and the amp, I could finally hear the radio going down the road, over the drone of everything else. But it takes a lot of speaker to make that work. So you guys with your field finds, you're probably not going to be able to hear your radio anyways. But yeah, so then finally, after it's not going to catch on fire, that it goes around the block okay, that it runs for the most part, and that your lights work and all that, then put some legit tires and wheels on it. If you're running a D series, we use the Ford wheels, the 84 to 95 Ford truck wheels for the 8 lugs. They are 16x7s usually. Perfect for running, decent sized tires. They're common. They're easy to get. That's a good wheel. You can snap your hubcaps on if you have them. Or if you've got the 5 lug, you have a half ton. If it's a Scout, those are 5 on 5.5. You can find those wheels. They're Jeep wheels. The center hole on a lot of aftermarket wheels is too small for the Scout hub. But if you have a half-ton truck or travel-all, they have that internal locking hub. So the small hole 5 on 5.5 wheels fit it just fine, which are, again, Ford F-150, Bronco, that kind of thing. So those can be found pretty cheap. So then, put wheels and tires on it. And then you're not out of the woods, because now you're going to start driving it all the time. And that's when new problems come up. Like, oh, I didn't realize the engine leaked this much oil, or the transmission, or the pinion seal on the rear end, or the wheel seal, or whatever you overlooked the first time around. So these things are constant, ongoing maintenance projects once they're on the road. And I don't just mean changing the oil and, changing the transmission fluid every year. Like, stuff is always popping up with them when you're keeping them going. So they're great learning experiences. They are great teachers. You end up learning a lot. I guess what I left out in my initial tool list, and I'm sure somebody's probably already telling me that I forgot it, is you should get the manual. Binder Books sells the service manual for your model. And then there's also what's called the MT book, the MT, like Michael Thomas book. That is the exploded parts diagram book. That is great for helping you understand how parts go together and come apart, just from a pictorial aspect. So I really recommend everybody get the MT book and get the service manual for your model. And then that really helps you figure out some of the stuff when you're new and starting out, because you definitely need all of the help you get, because no one around you is going to know what's going on. And the old guy neighbor down the street, more than likely, has never worked on an International and is going to give you a bunch of bad advice. I mean, I've heard it over and over, like, oh, that's a Chevy part, or International was the value line from Dodge. And, it's like, all that's wrong. But this stuff is out there. So just, so along with your tool set, make sure you get the manuals, and then start in, like I described, be realistic, and then finally, once it's running and driving and you're doing your ongoing maintenance, then you look at rust repair. Rust repair is the last. Body work should be the very last thing you do. I know it sucks because you're going to drive a rusty hunk of shit around, but it's body work is last. You want a mechanically sound, reliable driver before you put any money into paint and body. So anyway, well, this was a long one. I probably could have gone for hours longer, but I'm going to hang it up here. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for sitting through this. Thank you for telling your friends. Thank you for sharing and subscribing. And until next time, I'm Dan for Binder Boneyard.